Recording. Okay, to give your blobs more dimension, let me close this. This will just be really quick, and I'm going to move back and forth between here and Photoshop. So, new, I'll make it. And make my blob on here, so. This may be a little big, but I think it'll work off okay. I'm going to paint it real quick using an airbrush, just because I'm not so concerned about the blob itself is what I'm going to do with it afterwards. So dark on that layer. That's not what I didn't want to do. It with sprinkles. Let's get a white. Little highlight. And the only problem with this, I want to save that selection. Save it. Okay, drip. So I'm going to make another layer for the shadow real quick. Whoops, wrong color. Okay, let me put it under, and pull this down. And all I want is really the shadow under here, so I'm going to load the first selection. Going to invert it. No, this will work just like this. With this layer, I'm just going to backspace it. And so there it gave me the shadow. I really should have softened it first, but this is okay. And the one last thing I want to, on a layer behind this, I'm just going to fill it with a pattern, just because I want something behind it, maybe. I'm going to fill it with this texture, so there you can see the bottom and the shadow and this, and I'm going to change them in a minute to make them work. Let me see what's going on there. This layer should, okay, that's, so guess what that texture is? I'm just curious. The only reason I know is because I made it.
Is it a painting canvas board?
It's a Chris, that's
per palette?
that's almost it. It's the desktop where people have been with their palettes on a desktop mixing it. And when I was at UVU, there was a whole room full of these things. They were going to replace them, so they're just set out. And I love the tops of them, so abstract that I just thought, oh, I'm going to use those as as textures. And I don't remember how Corel saw one, but they asked me, oh, could we use those? And it's like, for a price, sure. So, yeah, that's what it was. I'm just going to, beat the texture down a little bit there. So, now let me just go. So it's just not quite as intense. And this, and we'll shift, click, click, collapse. Okay, now I'm going to save this and I'll go to Photoshop. Where's my dialogue? Where's my dialogue? PSD file so I can open it. Okay, close this. I'll leave it open. Get Photoshop up. Come on, Photoshop. Okay, so, okay. So what I want to do on this is, you know, that water causes refraction. So sometimes I want to make sure that I can see some of that refraction in a drop. Not often, but once in a while. So I'm going to duplicate this layer. So my texture layer. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to load the selection. Well, where did that go? That one didn't work. Oh, document. Let's. And now with this layer selected, come up under filters and distort and spherize. And what I'll do, bring this over, and I want to do the maximum amount, probably. So all I'm going to do is, within this selected area, bulge it out so it looks a little more 3D. It may not work on this first one. I may have to try it again, because there's no way for me to preview really what it's going to look like. But that looks pretty good. So click. Now you can see it bulging a little bit. Let me move these off. So if I turn it off and then on, it's bulged it out, sphered a little bit. Put this one back on, turn it to, no, wrong layer. Multiply, and tweak it. I'd overpaint that. This one, also multiply. Probably soften that one a little bit. Oh, cancel. I've still got this selection working, and it won't, of course, do anything outside of the selection. So Control D, and then I will do this. Blur, Gaussian blur. I'm not going to ask you to do this. I just want you to know that you can do it. And it needs to be, I'm not going to worry about making the refraction come through it, but I'm going to trim it. And this lost my, somewhere it lost, oh, this is multiply, that's why. Let me do this. Select and load the selection again because I've got this drip one already in place. I haven't moved it. And I will clean this inside edge by just backspacing it. So cleans that out. I'm going to copy this bulged area too. So image, select invert, and I'm going to clear off all the background and just keep the drip itself. So you have to decide what's good, what's bad. And then I do need to, I'll just do it in here, new layer, and this will be, I'll leave it on top because I can make a highlight on it then. This will be screen, and get me a brush. And color. Whoops, wrong layer. And just assuming that my drop has a little bit of color to it. With the selection, another layer, and I'm just going to fill it. Well, I could fill it with itself. I'll duplicate it, and so I've just multiplied it on top. I don't want it to go too dark, but a little darker than the back will help set it off. You might, I'm not sure I like that as much as if I just filled it with a color. Let me see on a new layer. Ooh, that worked. Not. Reselect. All I'm trying to do is just make the whole drip look like it's got some distortion and a little bit that it bulges the underneath and gives it a little, that's too dark. But I think you get the idea what I'm trying to do with that. So I'm not going to ask you to do this. I just thought I would show it to you. I do the same thing with, like, if you watched any of those making eye videos, you can make really good bug eyes doing this. You can do all sorts of things with the sphere eyes and some of those distortions. Okay, so let me go back to Painter. And it's very similar to what I did here, what I will do for painting some drips on this. So if you want to follow along, this is 1200 by 1200 pixels, and I just filled it with a texture. So with the paint can texture, and we haven't done textures too much, but it's the first one. So that must mean it's the best one. Actually, I made a number of these, but this one will work. Peeling paint might work really good too. Let me see what that looks like. Made the wrong kind of layer. So either do peeling paint or the other one. It'll work for both of them. I'm getting rid of this. And these are going to be the layers. Look how big it makes it. Okay, it's really simple. You've already made the dewdrops. It's really simple to make it dripping down a wall. So new layer. And I'm not going to change what the layer looks like at this point. Let me zoom in. And because I'm kind of lazy, I'm going to cover this top section with a lasso tool. And I'm going to fill this with a color that's probably selected from within here somewhere. So get the paint bucket with current color, and I'll pick, that's probably just fine. Wrong layer. Ultimately I'm going to turn this to a multiply layer, but just to check what it's going to look like. You know, I want it to look, you know, to color the surface a little bit like dirty water would do. So probably a little darker than that. Let me check it on this layer. And so that's okay. This will be the original one. I'm going to keep it as a default layer right now. And then what I'm going to do is on a new layer. And this is all of this, I work it so that I can back up at any point if I think I'm making errors. So I could paint on this colored layer if I wanted, but I don't need to right now. I'm going to pick an inky ink brush just because they've got some nice, a pen brush. They've got some nice kind of or smooth ink kind of thing. Pen. Flat color, hard, any of them are fine. Probably flat color because I don't want a lot of variation in the width of the stroke. Let me try another one just to make sure. That one would work too. So now I'm just going to draw my first drip. Let me check this one. Okay, so I'm going to use this one that starts out small, but and let me hide these behind layers so you can see what I'm doing. I keep the canvas vertical because if I tip it, there's a chance I'm not going to get these drips going vertically. And I'm not worried too much about how smooth they are. I'm not going to do too many because it'll spend a lot of time, but you'll get the idea from these. Come in here and I want to actually smooth the edges out. Now I'm still on my drip layer and not on the background water layer, but that's okay. I want there to be easy back off if I make a mistake. And part of it is I may decide I either want these larger or smaller once I get the smooth edges painted. And it's a lot easier to do it on its own layer than enlarging or making the color layer larger or smaller too. I do want this area, this curved area, to be a pretty smooth curve. I'm not paying attention to the texture underneath at all at this point. If I had a rocky something, I might make some of these conform more to some of the lines or linear parts of the texture itself, but I'm not too worried about it. But I do want some of these ends not to look so blobby, but maybe a little more like drips. They don't have to be perfect. I just think they look a little better if, at least, in fact, I like the trails to be kind of all over the place, but I like the drips themselves to be a little bit cleaner. They look more like snail trails, I think. I don't care. All right, so basic drips. These obviously look, just because of the shape of them, a lot more like a gooey kind of substance. A water would be much more something like this. So I'm doing a B, I'm hitting the B and V key. So if I was doing water or thin paint or something, do that, go back, and then make these edges smooth, or if the surface it's on is smooth. But the same thing will work, whatever your shape, for the most part. Then down to here, a nice kind of drippy shape. I like to, just because, you know, if you look at drops as they're running down a surface, they tend to have enough gravity affecting them that the point becomes, well, the tip of them becomes a little bit pointed. So I try to get that in. These do look thicker without doing a nice little tip. So there is, whoops, cancel. Now, if I'm really lazy, I do the same thing I did with the trees, with not any of these because they're already too varied, but this one. Use this strip and duplicate it a number of times, and not compact it vertically very much, but horizontally I could go a little bit larger, a little bit smaller. And because drips basically behave the same, it would look the same. So in fact, I can do that and then decide which one you want to see. Okay, so I'm going to hide these ones. Control, hold down the Alt key. And I'm not changing the size on these, which if I was being careful I would. Clean up their edges. And you can be as accurate on these. You could paint them off of shapes or selections or whatever. But for the most part, again, nobody really knows what drips of water running down a surface look like. So you can get away with a lot of just kind of inventing what you want to have happen. Okay, I'm going to have to go fast because I'm going to be running out of time here real quick. Okay, let's erase that. Okay, I'm going to create, I'm just going to work with this new layer, this layer. I'm going to create a new layer above it, and I'm going to control click this one so just these drips are selected. I'm going to come back with an airbrush just because I want this to kind of be soft, and soft is fine. And what I'm doing is I'm coming back in here, picking a little bit darker color, and on my new layer, painting this dark part of the drip. Now this is assuming really thin liquid, because I could actually go around and paint a little bit of shadow on this too. Probably save that for next time. So on a new layer, now again, I'm going to paint a highlight on these, but I'm going to use sharper pen. So I'm going to drag that off because I'm using it. I'll go back to the pens, and the smooth color is fine. And I'm going to drag it down because it seems to be I'm using these more than anything. So on this one, and I'm still on new layer, now the highlights in drips will be long. They won't be tiny little spots. And they'll be pretty much in the darker areas you've put on here. The same, no, I'll do it on another layer. Want to get the light spot on the bottom here. So go back to my airbrush. And it would be a good idea to label all these so they don't get confused. Now these are going up a little soft, and I'm going to cut just a little of that off. So come back in with the eraser. That's maybe too much. Okay, now, so there's my drops. I'll start turning on the layer so you see what this does. So on this layer, Control D, and I'm going to change this to multiply. This one to multiply. Now I got to cut those off because I'm stacking multiplies on top of each other, but I wanted to at least get the colors the same color. This will be multiply, but I don't have to do anything with this because it'll work just fine as darkening this. Maybe they're a little too dark. This is, okay, those I'm going to turn to screen, and they're going to stay pretty light. And I'm going to leave these all as just the highlights just as they are. So to get rid of these extra bits, Control click the layer that's the main drip going over it, and I'm going to invert that. And I'm going to backspace, select this layer and backspace it. Oops, wrong layer. Sorry, I didn't need to invert it. I wasn't paying attention. Now I'll backspace it on those. And so I've got some drips coming down, working pretty good. I do need to get a little bit of shadow, so I will go ahead and combine these now. So Control D, and select, come on, Shift. And I'm going to collapse those and see if it works. Okay, I don't care except for, that works fine, except for the top two layers. So I'm going to uncheck those. Now I'll collapse them. And that looks fine. It just, whenever you combine something, it'll just go back to the default layer. I want to go ahead, and you can see the little areas here, that the little pixel right in between the selection. I'm just going to paint those out real quick. And I need to get some shadows underneath them. This might look better on the other background. Yeah, probably looks a little better on this. Really easy enough to do. I will load the selection for this, create a new layer, and I will paint this layer or fill it with same color, change it to multiply. But I'm going to lower this layer below the others. So I just am placing it slightly below, and because my highlight's on this side of the drop, the shadow is going to be slightly to the other side here. And I'm going to move this down. I'm going to load the selection for this. And with this selected, I'll backspace it. So it's clearing off almost everything but the shadow underneath. I will soften this a little bit. Too much. I think I've got the reflection a little too light on there, so I can either come in and erase a little bit on one of these with a soft low opacity. Make sure I got the right layer. And I've got to erase. I've got some, you can see, hanging down there where I don't want. I would use this again later to make this whole thing look like it's got more depth, but right now I just want to get rid of this. Because I want these to be thin, thin little drips. You might, again, these are really work better probably on a not quite so textured surface because they're just so straight as they flow down. Let me put a new layer there and fill it real quick. So maybe with a Come on. So that gives a little better look at what how they look. And you can see obviously that I've got to clean more off of them. So it's not bad to put on another layer and see where you've missed. But that's really all there is to it at its most simple. Is wrong one. Just stretching out a little bit what you've already done. And if I was to do blood, I'd do it just the same, except this would be lighter with a highlight on it, and then this would get darker down here. Missed a few areas. And I'm going to try something real quick. I don't expect it to work perfectly, but it will show you some more potential of it. So there would be the drips coming down, and multiple surfaces. If I had like cracked rocks, I would flow them along some of the things. If I was doing them on this, I might have them flow and come out of one of these bigger cracks in the paint, come out something here. It's a little hard to see them against that paint surface itself. Okay, so the one other thing, and then I'll be out of time, would be just for chuckles, and duplicate this layer. And I'm only duplicating it because I don't want to ruin the bottom one. Turn this one off. And I'm going to do one of the plugins, Bevel World. And I may need to load the selection. Or it's thinking, let's see what it does. Okay, so the dialog box went somewhere. Where did it go? Oh, it's thinking some more. Oh, there we go. Come on. So I wouldn't want it to be that harsh. And I wouldn't want it to be so wide. So now I'm smoothing it. Lower the bevel width a lot. Now, outside color, it's doing multiply. I don't want it to be that gray color. So I would pick something more in keeping with what I'm already doing. See what happens. Okay, so just for trying it on a lark, it actually is working better than I thought it would. Click OK. It's created a new plugin layer, and I think it's that one. So that's the new plugin layer. If I wanted to change it, I can double click on that layer and it will bring up that dialog box again. That actually adds somewhere, it'll bring up the dialog box again. I think it's thinking about it. There it is. So you could try, different things. Make it a deeper, shallower height. And I can't tell you which is the right or wrong. You'd have to play with this. Real small bevel width. Doesn't seem to be changing the outside. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong color. Never mind. This is if I add a color around the outside, it'll pick up this color. So It's multiplying it still, but you can see the yellow coming into it. So I'm going to do it. Okay, so click OK when it's done saving now. I'd right click on this and I would convert to default layer. So now I've got one with that and this one underneath. And this one actually looks a little bit better to me, but I don't want the bevel on the outside of it. So what I would do with that would be convert it to a default layer and pick this color and just paint over that. So any of that outside bevel, brush, Alt. And now when I go back and multiply this, I'll leave it so you can see where it's painted over and where it's not. So see, I can make it look like a thicker. You can make it look like it's a little bit wavy. You can do all sorts of things. But just a quick and dirty way to do drops going down a surface. Questions? Rude remarks? Comments? Now that, with more depth to it, actually looks a little better than having the blue on it. Let's see what happens if I... Okay, I'll take it off. Okay, so I'm stopping recording. So this is 47 minutes long.